Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here today with the 20 questions tag. I wasn't actually tagged in this, but I watched my booktube friend Nikki over at Rereads. I'll include her link below. I watched her video of this tag, and it seemed like something really quick and easy that I could do. I really enjoy doing booktube tags, but life has been really hectic lately, and I don't always have the time to fit something like that in. In fact, I do have a backlog, so if you've tagged me, I apologize for not getting to it yet. I haven't forgotten, but this seemed like one I could knock off really quickly on a busy day. Oh, and I forgot to look up who started this tag, but I will, and I'll include that down below as well. So, question 1. How many books is too many in a series? Well, I don't read a whole lot of series. Once in a while, I'll get into one. I generally tend to read just a few books in a series, or if I'm going to read more, it's kind of a once a year thing or once every 6 months. So for instance, the Stephanie Plum series by Janet Ivanovich, my husband and I both loved those books. I have no idea how many she's up to at this point. Last I heard, it was like around 27 or something. For a while, I was reading one a year when they came out, and spread out like that, I enjoy series more. There's the Outlander series by Diane Gabaldon is another one I enjoy, but I've only read the first 2 books before. Those are really hefty books, so it takes me longer to get to them. So it kind of depends on what series it is, but generally I don't read a lot of books in a series or read a lot of series in general. Louise Penny is another one. I read book 1, then I read book 16, and I do have her latest book downloaded on audio, so I think that's 17, so I may get to that, but as you can see, I skipped quite a few. Okay, question 2. How do you feel about cliffhangers? At the end of a chapter, great. They keep me reading. At the end of a book, not so much. Maybe part of the reason I don't read a lot of series. I like a book to come to some kind of a conclusion. Even if it's an ambiguous ending, I like things to wrap up in some way. This summer, for Big Book Summer, the challenge that I host every year, I read Blackout by Connie Willis, one of my favorite authors. And I got to the end of it, and on the last page, in the middle of a bunch of action, it says, read book 2, all clear to see what happens next. And someone had warned me about that when I was almost through with the book. But still, it was like crushing. Now, admittedly, I did buy the second book. I haven't gotten to it yet. My husband has also read the first one and wants to read the second one. So hopefully we'll get to those, but I found it really frustrating. Here are those 2 books in the series, Blackout by Connie Willis, followed by All Clear. I am determined to read All Clear despite its size, before the end of the year, so that I can finish the story and know what happens. Okay, question 3. Hardcover or paperback? Doesn't really matter to me. Paperbacks are a little easier to read. They're lighter weight and usually a little smaller. Favorite book ever? My list of top 10 books is constantly changing and shifting, although there are some that are always there in the top 5. But my number 1 book hasn't changed in years, and that is Replay by Ken Grimwood. This is a book most people haven't heard of. I've read it 3 times now, and every single time it has just blown me away. It's about a guy who, he's like, I think in his 40s or 50s, he has does he have a heart attack? Something happens. And all of a sudden, next thing he knows, he's waking up in his college dorm room and he's 18 years old again. So he keeps replaying portions of his life. What I find fascinating about this and any book that plays with time is that it's so thought-provoking. You can't help while reading this and looking at the different decisions he makes each time he replays. How's he going to live his life this time? What's he going to do? You can't help but think about, what would I do? And I think that's one of the reasons I find it so fascinating, so compelling, and why I've read it 3 times, and I definitely plan to read it again. Okay. Least favorite book ever. Okay, this honor also goes to a little known book. It's a book called Moor. That's Moor. It was a German novel. This was back when I was reviewing books for Publishers Weekly. They would send a selection of books each month based on my preferences, and then I would choose one. So I started reading this book, and halfway through, and this is the only time I ever did this when I was reviewing books professionally, halfway through, I had to email my editor and say, I can't finish this book. Is it okay if I pick a different one? Because, okay, let's start with the fact that it's narrated by a pond in the backyard. Yeah. Think about that for a minute. It's narrated by the pond, and I was hanging in there, telling my husband this is a really weird book, but I was hanging in there, and then the mother started to have sexual fantasies about her 13-year-old son, and I was like, that's it. Mom of 2 boys here. I am out. So that was definitely my least favorite ever, and I did not finish it. Question 6 is love triangles, yes or no? I don't care. I don't read a lot of romance, so maybe this isn't all that applicable to me. If there's a love triangle in a book, it depends on how well written it is, what the rest of the plot is, etc. Question 7, the most recent book you couldn't finish. So I very rarely set a book aside without finishing it. I tend to push through, especially if it's one I've heard good things about. But this summer, I started listening to the audio of 3 Wishes by Liane Moriarty. And this is, I haven't read a lot of Liane Moriarty, but the books I've read of hers I have enjoyed. And I know she's a very popular author. I think this might have been one of her earlier books. I gave it up really quickly. I maybe listened to about an hour or so and then just went, it's not grabbing me. I've got so many other audiobooks I want to listen to, and I set it aside. But that is rare. Question 8, book that you're currently listening to. Well, I am in the middle of audiobooks right now. Today, I need to pick out a new one to listen to, but I did just finish a wonderful book for Nonfiction November called An Elegant Defense, The Extraordinary New Science of the Immune System, A Tale in 4 Lives by Matt Richtel. This was a fascinating book. And the author is not a doctor or a scientist or any kind of expert. He's a journalist, a reporter who became interested in the immune system when a friend of his had cancer and was undergoing immunotherapy. So he's writing at it from the perspective of a layperson. It was excellent. I highly recommend it. So that was my most recent audiobook. Question 9, the last book you read that you would recommend to someone. So here's the thing. I tend to choose my books very carefully based on reviews or people's opinions that I know like the same kind of books that I like. So I very often will recommend a book that I've just finished because, they're usually, like I said, I rarely don't finish a book. But the one I most recently finished that just absolutely loved was No Cure for Being Human by Kate Bowler. Now, Kate is the host of my favorite podcast called Everything Happens. She herself is living with incurable cancer. She writes about, this book in particular is about her journey with cancer, with her diagnosis, with her treatments, with her life now kind of in limbo. But throughout the book, she addresses different kind of pop culture self-help truisms. She refers to them as toxic positivity, things that we're told all the time that really don't apply in the real world. Because in the real world, like her podcast says, everything happens. Things happen. Bad stuff happens. And somehow we need to get through it. And just being positive doesn't do it. So it's a wonderful book. Like her podcast, it made me laugh out loud. It made me tear up. I tabbed like a million different pages because I love the way she writes and speaks and the way she puts things. So that's the book most recently read that I would recommend. And question 10, oldest book read by publication date. This one took a little bit of research. I was looking back. Every year I do a classics challenge. So I was looking back at the classics I've read, lots of them from the 1800s or the 1900s. But then it occurred to me, Shakespeare. Shakespeare's got to be among the oldest books that I've read. So looking through the Shakespeare that I've read, one of the earliest was A Midsummer Night's Dream, published in 1600. Now, I did read that back in junior high, so it's been a long time. More recently, last year in October, I read Macbeth and listened to it on audio, and that was published in 1606. So those are probably the oldest. Question 11, newest book read by publication date. I don't read a lot of new releases, except on audio, and graphic novels too. Those are the two categories where I get some review books from publishers, and so I'm a little more up to date. On my own, I'm generally not reading the latest releases. So I think the one that I've read that is the newest is probably a middle grade novel that I listened to on audio last month for Halloween, called The Ghost of Midnight Lake by Lucy Strange. And it was published on September 21st, 2021. Okay, question 12, favorite author. So I thought this was a wrap, probably Barbara Kingsolver, who I love. But then as I was going through the other questions, I realized I also really love Connie Willis. She's a little newer to me. So among some of my favorite books, I love Kingsolver's The Poisonwood Bible. Love The Bean Trees and its follow-up, Pigs in Heaven. I just love the way she writes. I think her earliest books are the best, but I really enjoy some of her newer books as well. And besides the two Connie Willis's I showed you earlier, Blackout and All Clear, one of my favorite books was Doomsday Book by Connie Willis, which I read last year. She writes this whole series of time travel books, which I love. And in this one, a historian goes back to the 1300s and gets trapped there. And 1300s, I think you know the kind of things going on there. So lots of suspense, lots of history. I just loved it. So Connie Willis and Barbara Kingsolver, let's just call it a tie. Okay, question 13. Buying books or borrowing? Well, for me, it's usually borrowing. So here's the thing. And I know this is going to be like horrible to a lot of booktubers. I don't really buy books for myself. I stopped doing that maybe 10 to 15 years ago, money was really tight. We have a lot of medical expenses, and I just quit doing it. However, my husband, my son, and I all buy each other books for birthdays, Christmas, in my case for Mother's Day. So I get plenty of new books throughout the year. The rest of the time, I try to read from my shelves. It is a losing battle. I always have more books coming in than I'm finishing. Not to mention half the ones that I finish, at least I want to save. So it's a losing battle. But most of the time, I do not buy books for myself. So I do get books from friends sometimes if they've read something good and they want me to read it. If a book is chosen for one of my book groups that I don't have, I get it out of the library. I do rely on the library a lot. Now, the exception to my no buying books for myself rule is if we are traveling somewhere that has an indie bookstore, I will buy a book or two to support the indie bookstore. I did this most recently. We hadn't gone anywhere in over 2 years, partly because of the pandemic, partly because we're caring for my elderly father-in-law. And we went down to Rehoboth Beach and Lewis in Delaware for our anniversary last month. And Rehoboth has an amazing bookstore called Browse About. And so I did buy some books there to support the bookstore. And in return, they are supporting me. One of the reasons we stopped in to visit was to ask if they could stock my book, Finding a New Normal, Living Your Best Life with Chronic Illness. And they did. So my book is now on the shelves there, and I'll be doing a signing there next month. So I'm excited about that. So I do like to support indie bookstores, and in return, they support me. Okay, question 14. A book you disliked, but everyone seemed to love. So, like I said, I like most of the books I read because I choose very carefully what I read. However, I read Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff for one of my book groups, and I didn't finish it, which again is really rare for me. Now, I enjoyed her Arcadia, but this one, it just didn't grab me. I found both of the main characters really unlikable. I read the first half of the book, went to the book group discussion, and was like, do I really want to spend my time finishing this book I am not enjoying? And the answer was no. So, and I know lots of people loved that book. Okay, question 15, bookmarks or dog-eared pages? So when it comes to saving my place, the answer is bookmarks. I just grabbed this pile out of my nightstand. There are many more there and all over the house. Many of them are from the library or from favorite bookstores. Some are very sentimental books from when my kids were in school. There's everything in here. This bookstore in New Orleans has been out of business for decades, I think. I do not throw away bookmarks. So I have a lot of bookmarks. There's another one from my son when he was in preschool. However, and I hope I won't upset anyone with this, I do sometimes dog-ear pages. If it's a book I own and there's a quote on the page that I want to write down in my quote journal and remember, then I do dog-ear the page. I try to make a little tiny corner so that it's not really all that bad. And as I said, in No Cure for Being Human, I did that a lot. There are a lot, I don't know if you can see from there, but there are a lot of dog-eared pages in this book now. But that's okay, it's mine. Okay, question 16. A book you can always reread. Of course, as I explained earlier, Replay is one of my favorites. I've read it 3 times. I know I'll read it again. But some of the other books that are in my top 10, I would always be happy to reread. So that includes the Barbara Kingsolvers I showed you earlier, The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger is one of my all-time favorite books. I've read it twice, and the second time I cried just as hard, even though I knew it was coming. The Connie Willis books I would reread. The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry I've read twice, and it does make me cry, but it's all about books and love, and it's just a wonderful, heartwarming story. Question 17. Can you read while listening to music? No. Maybe music without lyrics, but generally, no. I like it quiet when I read, no distractions. The exception is audiobooks, although I still wouldn't play music while listening to one, but I always have my iPod in my ear while I am doing the dishes or doing laundry. So I do listen to audiobooks while doing other things, but when I'm reading a print book, I want no distractions. Question 18, one or multiple points of view? It depends on the book. I generally really enjoy a novel with multiple points of view. I think it gives you a lot more depth of understanding, different perspectives. But, you know, I've read some amazing books from a single point of view too. So it depends on the book. Question 19, read a book in one sitting or over multiple days? Definitely over multiple days. Unless it's a very short graphic novel and I've got a lot of time on my hands, which doesn't ever happen. I always, you know, I need a nap in the afternoon because of my chronic illness. So I read before my nap and I read before bed. And occasionally, like when we're camping, I will take a break and read in the middle of the day. But it generally takes me, 5 to 7 days to read a typical length book and longer to read bigger books. And 20, tag people. Today I'd like to tag a couple of my favorite booktubers, book zealots, and Beth Ann. I'm sorry, Beth Ann, but I am not going to attempt to pronounce your last name. I'll include their links down below. I also want to tag a new to me booktuber that I've just recently discovered, and she's pretty new to booktubing. So I would love for you to go and visit her channel and give her some likes. And that's Josie Helsel. Hope I pronounced that one right. So those are my 20 questions. I hope you enjoyed getting to know a little bit more about me and my reading habits.